Hey, friends. Robert Bevan here, author of the Caverns and Creatures series of comedy, fantasy novels, and short stories. With me is Sam West, and it is a Martial Monday. So we are going to be talking about a fighting style. This week's style is thrown weapon fighting.
Just like that.
Yeah.
It is, like most fighting styles, pretty simple. You can draw a weapon that has the thrown weapon property as part of the attack you make with the weapon. In addition, when you hit with a ranged attack using a thrown weapon, you gain +2 to the damage roll. Neat.
Um,
What's your impression?
Kind of neat. I mean, I don't know if this is worth it. This is going to take some convincing for me. Unless thrown weapons are your go-to, your main thing you do, then I mean, I always think of thrown weapons as something secondary.
Mhm.
You know, if you mainly fight with a sword, you don't have any targets within reach. Somebody's over there, but you don't want to swap out for a bow. All right, well, I'll pull my dagger and do that. But I don't know. What what am I missing here?
So, I think that for the vast majority of people playing fighters, for people playing rangers, for people that have access to thrown weapon fighting, you're either going to be committing to a melee build, in which case you're using your great swords, you're using two-weapon fighting sometimes, longsword shield, one of those varieties of options typically. Sometimes you're spicing things up and picking up a big maul, or you're switching out your longsword for a flail or whatever, just to fit the flavor thematically. But like those are the kind of tried and true options we know about. We know dueling is fine enough. We know great weapons fighting is, and the builds for it are quite good. We know pull and master stuff is, those builds are quite good, and we know that you got the sharpshooter stuff, right? Two-weapon fighting is a little bit worse. I put that on like a little tier below those, which is the two short swords, stabby. Sometimes you go long sword in the upper tiers, or if you take the feat and have the strength and all that stuff for it, right? Lots of conditions around the two-weapon fighting builds. And then like below that is the tier I think is where thrown weapon is. And the reason that I put this here is just because it, like you said, it's never anyone's typical first place they go. They don't necessarily jump to I use thrown weapons effectively. The other thing is just like thrown weapons are kind of bad. So like the trident is I think the most interesting of the thrown weapons in that it's got like a bunch of conditions on it. Same with spears, they're kind of the same. So spears are thrown with a range 20 over 60 and versatile for a d8, so they can be held in two hands, but you can also throw them. So doing d6 from range, pretty cool. Darts are thrown weapons, and that's like then you got your trident, and then you got your hammers and stuff that do d4, d6s. So like our dice sizes are pretty low. And that's like ultimately where I'm like, I don't really care about doing this over most of my other options. +2 to damage is a lot, and not having to care about your interacting with objects means you can make 2 or more attacks with these a turn without having to worry, because normally you would draw one as part of an attack, but you can only do that once a turn. So then you'd have to like spend more actions to draw more stuff, and then you get really like cluttered, and you can't necessarily do two-weapon fighting with them all that well. In the case of thrown weapons, you do have the ability to like you throw one, you can throw another with your offhand, throw another with your extra attack, and that is no cost of actions beyond just having to have the physical stuff on you, and you draw it for free, basically. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine if that's your primary way to attack. But I'm thinking you've got the archery, which +2 to damage on range weapons. That's if you're taking that, it's because you're an archer and you're pretty much just going to be shooting your enemies.
Yeah.
This, unless you're going to be constantly throwing crap at your enemies, then I don't know. I mean,
You
and
also,
I guess
I mean,
there are builds that specialize in thrown weapons, are there? I don't know.
not really. So they have this is a fighting style that wasn't native to the game when it got printed, right? This got added down the road. I don't remember what book, but it got added whenever they added the druidic warrior and stuff, I think. So it is throw weapon fighting was always kind of a thing that I've had a couple players want to try out and largely find that juggling the having to carry all the crap on them, knowing to go pick it all up, and having to go through that monotony is annoying to establish with your DM to start. And then also comparative to like all of the other existing pretty well established builds, there's just not a lot of support for it. it very quickly became like a worse version of two-weapon fighting, or something you would do alongside two-weapon fighting, with two-weapon fighting sort of being the primary, and you just have a couple of light hammers on you, have a couple of dex-based daggers or whatever on you, so you can do the finesse fighting styles where you're using your dex to attack with, but you're doing it with thrown weapons, so you can kind of have some range options if you want to. And that's, I think, honestly, like, that's the best home for it. That's where I would like it to stay. I think throw weapon fighting alongside the two-weapon fighting as somewhat hybrid, kind of pulling out a bunch of stuff and attacking with them and stabby and using the skirmisher distances in a fun way could be useful. This wants you to be dedicatedly only throwing things. And it has to be a ranged attack, right? You can't even be using thrown weapons in melee range to get the damage bonus. The damage bonus only applies whenever you make the ranged attack roll with it, which really hamstrings this to be, you have to keep pulling things out and keep throwing them. And that's just not as viable as a lot of the builds are, I don't think. I don't see there being a lot of build support for it anyway, like beyond doing two-weapon fighting stuff. And I'm not even positive that you can throw weapon with your offhand for two-weapon fighting. I'm assuming you can, but I'm not positive that is the case.
Yeah, and all right, another thing. I'm going back to archery again. You get your +2 to damage, and that stacks with your sharpshooter.
Mhm.
Yeah, do you have any similarly kind of support thing for two-weapon fight? Not thrown weapon fighting?
I'm looking at the feats right now because nothing comes to my mind, and I don't see anything. I've reviewed, I believe, every single feat in this game. Nothing really stood out to me as like, yes, this is specifically good with thrown weapon fighting. So like, you got dual wielder, which gives you a little bit of AC while you're doing it. So like, yeah. And that's if you're using the light thrown weapon, so you're like specifically locking into daggers and stuff then. But most of these are lights, they're thrown. But like the tridents and spears aren't. You could do conceivably, I think you can, so like Polar Master, I don't know if it works with spears, weirdly enough. So it requires the weapon, I don't know if it can be versatile or not. I think it might have to be two-handed. Glaive, halberd, quarter. No, okay. So Polar Master specifies that it works with spears. So conceivably, you could be like you throwing spears to get the bonus +2 to damage, and then take Polar Master to do offhand attacks that are in melee range and not getting the bonus to damage from that. So that doesn't seem like really where you want to be. You'd probably rather have a like dueling or something so that the spear does more damage always. Yeah, I'm like bending over backwards. There probably exists the best version of this build. I don't know what it is. It doesn't seem better than the vast majority of other like average builds. That being said, I think if you don't mind carrying around a dozen specifically light hammers, if you're strength or hand axes, and if you're not doing those two, you're doing dex, which is better usually. You're using daggers, which is a dice downgrade. Then like you're gonna have a pretty bad time with this.
Ooh, yeah. I can't think of anything really to save this one.
So there is something to be said, right? Like if you have two daggers at level 1 and you throw one, hit for a d4 +5, hit the other one with the offhand throw one for a d4 +5, right? That is a decent chunk of damage. And if you have 10 daggers on you, that probably lasts you the fight. In the early tier, I see that being pretty fine. And the fact that you get to pick them up for free is pretty good, right? I think there are a decent number of fighters and rangers that can probably pull that off. If you know you're playing in a short campaign, I think that's probably where it's at its best. That is a very gimmicky, and it's really, your range is locked into like you want to be exactly 20 feet away from everything you're fighting all the time, right? This is the kind of character that really doesn't want to be in melee range, because if you have to make melee attacks, you stop getting your damage bump to this and it doesn't do anything anymore. So like maybe you scale up to take a second fighting style with like the fighter class or something, and you get your two-weapon fighting then. So you use thrown weapon in the early game, take two-weapon, and you switch to that in the late, and then you're still juggling your bonus action a little bit of an awkward way, but not that much. Maybe that's something. At the same time, like, again, a level 1, level 2 character, making 2 attacks a turn, getting the d4 +5, because it's going to be dex mod plus 3 +2, right? That's going to be a decent chunk of damage. That's could be a real way to use this. I just don't see it really scaling all that well past that.
All right, so, all right, you're getting your dex bonus to damage. Is that one?
So you would get your dex bonus to the first instance of damage. You wouldn't to the second because you don't have the two-weapon fighting style. But you would get a bonus damage to both of them. So you would add d4. So all right,
yeah, you
two-weapon fighting, thrown daggers.
Thrown weapon, yeah.
First one does a d4. Add your dex mod. Add the damage for being a thrown weapon from this fighting style. The second one, because it's an offhand attack, will not add your dex mod to the damage. It will add the +2 for the thrown weapon, though. So you get a D4 + 5 and then a D4 + 2. Every round is pretty decent.
Now, that is level 1. Trying our best to make this work somehow.
That is also like that's just with a fighting style. That's all you would have to do to make that happen is have a fighting style. That is a pretty low bar.
I understand, but even then, like, would this be any better than just using a bow?
Yeah. So that is making 2 attacks is notably better, and longbows sure they do a D8 + 3, but they're not adding anything to damage. So it's definitely going to do more damage.
A different fighting style.
If you took the archery fighting style, you're going to hit more often. But this gives you 2 attacks conceivably if you're not using your bonus action. So you're likely actually. I don't know how exactly the math checks out. I'd assume making 2 attacks with high mods is way more likely to hit once than 1 attack is with a slightly higher to hit. That would be my general understanding of it. I haven't crunched the numbers recently, but I'm assuming a D20 + 5, or sorry, a D20 + 7 is less likely to hit than 1D20 + 5, 1D20 + 5. I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure I'm not, but I could be.
That sounds about right.
So you're probably hitting more often, and you're doing slightly more damage when you hit both times, and that's pretty good.
Yeah.
It doesn't scale at all.
No.
And your range is substantially worse.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. Well, you got like it's worse on both ends because if what was the range? You said 20 feet?
It's 20 over 60, so it cannot throw beyond 60, and if you are further than 20 feet away, is a disadvantage.
Yeah, that I don't like that at all.
Yeah, that's pretty brutal.
Yeah, so your range is extremely limited to the point that you're just inviting the enemies that you don't kill to come beat on you, and then you don't get to use this the next time.
Then yeah, your feature doesn't do anything.
All right. I am not sold on this one.
Listen, if there were more interesting thrown weapons, net's a thrown weapon, so you could draw and throw a net.
Plus 2 damage on a net that does no damage.
But it is the special property, and yes, its range is 5 feet, which means it's at disadvantage because it's a ranged weapon made in attack melee attack range always, but you can't throw it beyond 15 feet. So like nets are bad, but they can restrain things, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. You can do 2 damage, I suppose.
I don't know
if it's a thrown weapon.
Yeah, I guess. I think that's how that works. Sure. Listen,
I mean, if you're gonna bother getting this fighting style,
I think if you're the kind of person that wants to play a character like a roguish fighter or ranger that just loves throwing daggers, right? That fantasy is a common enough one. You will not be miserable with this fighting style. It'll do enough damage specifically and only with daggers. It doesn't upgrade very well to anything. It kind of asks you to be in 2 different fighting styles at once, and juggling your positioning is going to be a little bit of a challenge. I typically like those kinds of challenges. This honestly is the kind of build that I would tend to lean to as a player. I like having to work a little bit harder to be efficient. I like having to try different options, and getting the flexibility of being able to make 1 attack somewhere, 1 attack somewhere else is pretty compelling to me. It's just like, it's worse than 2-weapon fighting by a lot. And
there's a difference between challenging and objectively bad.
This isn't objectively bad. We talked about this is better than a 1 longbow shot in a lot of instances.
I don't know about a lot of instances.
So if you are able to get within 20 feet of the target, I think this is better than a longbow shot. And I think there's a lot of tables that's going to be readily happening.
Yeah, if I'm getting that close, I want to be using
swords. Should you just be 2-weapon fighting? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you should. That is better because it does a D6 twice and adds the dex mod to both times instead of the +4. So like it is slightly lower damage end, but it gets slightly lower numerical damage added, but it gives you higher dice and scales better by getting likely better items with it, and it can go into different feats and stuff. And I don't love those feats, but like none exist for thrown weapons. So like, none that I can recall at least. Commenters, let me know if there are feats that I'm clearly missing that make this utterly busted in the upper tiers or mid tiers. I don't think there are. There probably exists the best build for this. I don't suspect it's better than most of the best builds for every other fighting style you have an option for.
All right, where I come down to this is if I'm within 20 feet of something, I want to be stabbing it with swords.
Sure.
If I'm if I want to attack something at range, I want to be more than 60 feet away.
That's reasonable.
And this doesn't mesh with that.
Didn't you just say you're playing a crossbow expert character that definitely isn't beyond 60 feet from things?
Did I say that?
You are playing that. Isn't that what your rogue's doing?
Wait, what's that got to do with 60 feet?
The range of hand crossbows, I believe, are under that. So you're closer
Right,
than that.
Well, no, they max out. But I've got a sharpshooter, so
Oh,
I
okay.
get
So you are
max
60
range,
feet away.
120 feet. Yeah.
And with crossbow expert, you get 2 attacks that are shooting for plus 15 damage. That seems good. Who would have guessed?
All right. Well, you got a rating for this?
I think it's a 2. I don't think it's offensive. I think the characters that can take it will be pretty effective at doing their thing, but their thing just isn't that effective. Like the annoyance of having to juggle finding all your weapons, the annoyance of having to have them all on you and be like, okay, these are the ones I'm actually actively tracking, is kind of like, you'll get over it pretty quickly. Your DM will be like, you assume you pick up all your stuff every time you go everywhere. Sometimes you lose daggers and you'll have to like track that, and that's something that I don't want to have to handle. It's why I like arrows, because they don't come back. I just, I don't care to get them to come back. So then if you're still doing enough damage, though, that if you don't mind juggling that and you really love the fantasy, it'll be perfectly reasonable. It doesn't scale that well, but that's not the end of the world.
Ooh, I'm inclined to give this one a 1.
It's plus 4 damage. That's just fine.
Yeah. All right, all right. I said I'm inclined. I didn't say I'm going to.
It's so narrow.
I've lost my train of thought. Yes. All right. I'm gonna. This is one of those ones where, yeah, you kind of talked me up a little bit, but I'm giving this a 2 in the hopes that somebody in the comments will give me something really cool to do with this.
There has to exist something, right?
That's where I'm at. I'm giving this a 2 based on faith.
Like, EKs can bonus action them back, but that doesn't seem good because you're spending your bonus action doing that instead of attacking. So I kind of hate that. So like, I don't love it with weapon bonds. Yeah, I don't know. I don't see much.
All right, commenters, you've been presented a challenge. Vindicate my 2. All right, that was Thrown Weapon Fighting. Martial Monday. Thank you, Sam, and thank you everyone for joining us. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments, like and subscribe and all that, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. If you found this helpful, informative, or entertaining, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button below. You needn't smash it. A gentle tap will suffice. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel. And make sure you check out the links in the description, where you'll find my Caverns Creatures series of comedy fantasy novels, Sam's full review of the spell, and other fun things.